And I thought we had an example.
Perhaps we can get going. We're 20 minutes past schedule. No problem, because everything we're doing today really fits in with the major theme we're trying to achieve. Allow me to introduce someone who probably doesn't need much introduction to you. Dr. Faryal Bazour from EUC, who is a noted Iraqi scholar, critic, translator, educated in Iraq, Lebanon, UK, France, USA, PhD in comparative literature in Columbia, 1978. She's basically the chair, and she's a professor and the chair of the comparative literature department at AUC. And she's written a number of important books: A Critical Defense Guide, Arab Women Waiting, A Critical Defense Guide with Radwa Adwan and Hana Rida, if I'm pronouncing it properly, Mehkati. Nocturnal Poetry, Arab Nights in Comparative Context, and she's the general editor of Alif, a journal of comparative poetics at AUC's, one of AUC's flagship journals. So she's primarily interested in comparative literature and post-colonial studies. Please welcome Faryal Bazour. I think she's the only one who also participated in the first kind of workshop we had like this some years ago, maybe 2 years, 20 years ago.
I want to say something about the introduction. I am no more the chair of the Department of English and Comparative Literature. I was sentenced to be a chair for 6 years, and the stigma sticks to me, but I'm not in it anymore. Now, my talk is entitled, it's a continuation in a way of the one before, but also it differs with it greatly. It's entitled The Canon and Beyond, Pairing as a Pedagogic Strategy. In a sense, it is inspired by Paulo Freire, who wrote the book Pedagogy of the Oppressed. I'm interested in subaltern, I'm interested in the oppressed, and I'm interested in those who do not have a voice and how we can help them articulate themselves. So, can you hear me well?
Oh, yeah.
Like the wife of Bath in the Canterbury Tales, I claim to be talking from experience. Unlike Alison, the wife of Bath, I will not be talking about marriage and its discontents, but about the canon and its discontents. I've been involved in teaching in the AUC core curriculum, the equivalent of AUB Civilisation sequence, for decades. And I have experienced not only its various metamorphoses, but also the changes of the student body over time, from the 1980s up till now. While technology has provided us with amazing potential, it has also deprived us from focus and the ability to do research in depth. The facility of finding information and sources in producing a fast food for thought program, that's what it has done to us. But everyone knows that what makes a dish delicious is slow cooking. Likewise with research. We need, I think, to learn how to offer material to our students that is of higher quality and lower quantity. We have to train them to read closely and to read slowly. Such a program will necessarily deprive us from reading the great and voluminous classics. No War and Peace, no Ulysses, and no Map of Love. However, what we can do is teach instead shorter works by Tolstoy, Joyce, and Swave, and teach them thoroughly. That is, spend classes analyzing their characters, their plot, and their poetics. My philosophy is less is more when it comes to a civilization sequence. The Death of Ivan Ilyich of Leo Tolstoy, Arabi by James Joyce, and 1964 by Annette Swift get us into works that are modern classics, and at the same time they are short and to the point. I do not believe in taking one chapter from Homer's Odyssey or Virgil's Aeneid to assign to our students. Again, my conviction is all or not at all. The only exception I would make is for frame stories that have a number of embedded stories in them. That includes the Panchatantra, the Arabian Nights, the Canterbury Tales, the Inferno, and the Decameron, among others. They are, after all, a collection of stories, and one can choose one of the embedded stories. However, I would never skip, when introducing any of the individual stories, the frame story of the Arabian Nights, or the prologue of the Canterbury Tales, or the opening canto of the Inferno. We all know, alas, that art is long and life is short. But we can still find canonical epics that can be short but carry the epical grandeur in them. The Epic of Gilgamesh is a work that captivates readers as it poses the question of life and death, of friendship and adventure. So we don't have to be bound by the Greco-Roman epics or by volumes of Abu Zayd al-Hilali to introduce to our students classical epics or folk epics. In introducing the Epic of Gilgamesh, or for that matter, any other work that has to be read by students in translation, we have to consider which translation, something that we haven't talked about in this workshop. I am for a readable translation rather than an accurate translation. I'm a translator and I try to be as accurate as possible to the original. But in terms of teaching these words, I prefer something that reads well and easily. For one thing, the story of Gilgamesh, like that of the Panchatantra and the Arabian Nights, has many versions. There is no one original, but several. So binding ourselves to a translation that does not take creative license is hardly offering an accurate original, since there is no such thing in these cases as a unique original. For another, when it comes to translation and translation studies, for a long time the principle of equivalence was sacred, but it's no more sacred. Now there is the interplay between the two principles in translation studies of equivalence and of non-equivalence. I would thus opt for Herbert Mason's free translation of the Epic of Gilgamesh over the more scholarly translation of N.K. Saunders, published by Penguin. There is a more recent poetic translation, adaptation, by the African-American poet Yusuf Komunyakaa that I have not yet used in my classes. But I believe the aesthetic in such works should have priority over so-called accuracy in our core. Why? Because we want to awaken interest in the themes and motifs underlying the epic and not study it historically, but explore it anthropologically. What does it mean for us today, this epic? How can we bridge 4,000 years and have an ancient text speak to us? Too many notes and alternative variations of the epic is not the point of reading Gilgamesh in our core civilization sequence programs. The point is to address existential themes and to sense the affinities with ancient texts. The trouble with the canon, which I would not give up in such a program, is its vastness. Somebody said, you know, what can we present and what can we drop? It's difficult to choose from it without feeling guilty about what was left out. When John Dryden said about Chaucer's, whom he admired, "Here is God's plenty," we can also say the same thing of the cultural canon. We can say, "Here is man's plenty." And of course, I use man embracing women as well. So how do we go about selecting from this treasury what we will assign to our students? In my experience in teaching, in the early years of core at AUC, we followed a chronological order, starting with the ancient Near East to the 20th century in Europe. While I'm for some kind of historical progression, I think it's important to take geographical factors into account as well, something that has been touched in the earlier discussion today. The canon taught in New Zealand, I'm sure, would and should include Maori folktales. The ones in South Africa, writing of Nelson Mandela, as each region should adjust the canon to reflect its place in the world without dismissing the rest of the world. And there is the rub, how we can do it. How do we do that? It's important to pay attention to our earthly affiliation to a place and then move outward. Our centers should be here, wherever here is, and then move to the rest as peripheries. So the canon in China is understandably different from the canon in Senegal. We are trying to train students to be citizens of the world. But before doing so, they have to learn that they also belong to their nation and to their region. What I mean by nation is the cultural heritage of a given country within a region. Take Algeria versus Lebanon. I can imagine Frantz Fanon on the core program in Algeria and Amin Ma'louf on the core program in Lebanon, for obvious reasons. No matter how cosmopolitan we are, we still have roots in our part of the world, even though such roots branch and blossom beyond our location. If anything, we're trying to acquire in core curriculum a national, a regional, and a global understanding of our complex world via reading of works that have preoccupied people not only for a short time as bestsellers do, but over a long time as canonical works do. Now we all know that the canon is not given and not inscribed in stone. It's fluid in content and varies historically. Just look at 100 years of Nobel laureates in literature to realize how ephemeral fame is. Some of these names have been completely forgotten, and some of them only ring a faint bell. The same is true of metaphysical poets who did not make a critical dent in English literary history until T.S. Eliot wrote about them, in particular about John Donne. So the canon is a highly elastic concept, in which some works are buried, others are resurrected. My point is that what is historically valid should be combined with what is geographically pertinent. Some works might be canonical in certain regions, but not in others. John Milton's Paradise Lost, for example, is a canonical work in England, but not globally. Some works managed to travel better than others. Rumi and Gibran traveled well beyond their regions, but not Al-Nifri and Al-Ma'ri. Sure, all specialists of classical Arabic literature will know of Al-Nifari and Al-Ma'ri, but they are not household names as Rumi and Gibran. My point is that the canon itself is highly constructed set of works, and we should admit that it is mobile as well. That, of course, gives us more freedom to pick and drop in our selections. Also, we should not forget, just because our discipline is literature, that a core course should be restricted to literary classics, modern or ancient. We cannot exclude other canonical works in the humanities and possibly in other fields, social sciences and natural sciences, if we are to train our students to be at home in their social and natural world. The reason I focus on literary works, apart from my own professional bias, is that literature tends to be, though not always so, accessible more than other disciplines. Furthermore, in literature we can see glimpses of social issues as well as psychological ones. We can have insights into science and religion and living scenes of history and geography. In many ways, literature is the mother of other fields of knowledge. Humanity started its reflection on the world itself imaginatively, as Giambattista Vico put it. This in turn gives us practically endless choices for our core, or as the French put it, l'embarras de choix. To have such multiple choices becomes embarrassing and confusing. It seems thus like an impossible task to decide on what to include and what to exclude in a core curriculum, keeping in mind that education and the university are not isolated utopias, as we would like them to be, but they are part and parcel of the societies they are embedded in. Power dynamics, whether political or academic, plays a part in the minute details of our syllabi, whether we are aware of it or not, consciously or unconsciously. The university, as Cardinal Newman and Edward Said argued, should be institutions where the play of ideas and reflections go unhampered. That is an island of freedom in pursuing knowledge. But we all know that islands are not immune from the overall environment surrounding them. Tsunamis and hurricanes affect islands, and islands are not cut off from their environmental surroundings. Given that we are encircled with barbarism around us, if not inside us, sentenced by the violence and the suppression of the other by any means, what Amin Ma'louf called murderous identities, how can we plant the seeds of cultural difference as an enriching factor? I use the term difference and not tolerance intentionally. I don't fancy the term tolerance applied to the other, ethnically or religiously. The other in terms of class, race, or gender. I feel as if the term tolerance implies there is a difference that we need to tolerate, when the difference should be, to my mind, something that we should celebrate. If we can simply get our students to understand that difference is not a curse, but a promise, it's an eye-opening key that unlocks human mystery, then we have accomplished something. If we can show them how different cultures and varied ways of conceiving the world complement each other in our common humanity, we would have achieved what a civilizational sequence attempts to do. Of course, I know we are going against the grain, since more and more narrow identities take hold of minds in a tragic way, undermining coexistence. Religious, racial, and political differences pose barriers among citizens of one country, nay, in one neighborhood, let alone in our planet itself. While we cannot train our students in the short span of teaching them the richness of other cultural ways, what anthropologists call the science of man, we can, I hope, instill in them the joyful wonder at other forms of thought and behavior. Vive la différence should be our motto. We have to teach our students the pleasures of diversity and the joys of discovering other modes of living. And the reference was to the term jouissance of Roland Barthes. That was mentioned in the earlier discussion. We should be teaching them to interpret rather than sentence. Now, to my mind, the only way to learn is to partake in the process. Yes, we can make the students memorize a stanza, retell a story, analyze concept, but surely the most important thing to teach them is the principle of learning itself. In other words, how to have an appetite for search and research, how one can continue to teach oneself. Learning, as the noble passion par excellence, is what we can hope to instill in them. This is not going to come by giving them what we think is the great works. And yet, paradoxically, the great works are indispensable as a frame of reference. So how should we have the cake and eat it? My answer revolves around the necessity of teaching dialectically, as Socrates taught us, but adding a twist to his method. Instead of interrogating the students about their beliefs and opinions until they find themselves contradicting themselves as Socrates did, we can ask them to find parallels to the themes and motifs in the great works of human civilization from their own experience and their own subculture. After all, students are not tabula rasa, blank slates that we can fill up with knowledge handed to them. They actually have their own worldviews, even though they might not be able to articulate them like the rest of us. Their world is necessarily not ours, given the generation gap. They cannot let go of their mobile phones. They have their own point of view on society and politics. Maybe they are uninformed, but lack of information has never been a reason for not constructing a worldview. As all dialogues, I don't believe it should be a procedure, a mechanism to get them to grasp the great works only. It should be mutual. We should be willing to learn from our students genuinely, as we hope they will learn from us. There should be a feeling of mutual exchange. They learn about the canon, and we learn about popular culture. And I know someone like Hayat teaches, this is the way she teaches in this course. We learn about their popular culture, their subculture. It's true we end up grading them, and they don't grade us. So the relation is not strictly mutakafia, as we say in Arabic, that is equal. But still, it can be reciprocal. We can raise their own contribution to parallel our stand against or correspond to an element in the canonical works we are teaching, and we have assigned them. This is what I meant in the subtitle of my talk, pairing as a pedagogical strategy. Get the students to contribute with their knowledge, limited as it might be, to the course. In other words, canonical as I am and uninformed as I am on popular culture, I have to admit that we need to call on both the canonical and the popular to make sense of our world. Another mode of pairing is to bring the literary text with another canonically critical text to illuminate it. Let me give an example I used last semester. I wanted students to see the interdependence of art, politics, and history. So I started with the civil war in Spain in the 1930s. I had the students read a newspaper account of an eyewitness report on the destruction of Guernica. And then we discussed the famous painting by Picasso. The students have heard of Picasso in a vague way, a name that rings a faint bell. But I doubt that they knew about the civil war in Spain, and even less about the Basque village, Guernica. We then covered the precision of the journalistic report in terms of naming the type of airplanes that bombed Guernica, and the period of bombing on a market day, etc. All the details. This is like a two-page report, you know. Versus the symbolism of Picasso's painting. They tried themselves to interpret symbols or signs in the painting. What the horse stands for, what the bug stands for, complemented by how established critics have interpreted these same painterly symbols and how the experts differed among themselves. This, of course, is a chance to discuss the difference between civil wars and national wars, and get the input of students to differentiate between them. But also it's an opening to show how art attends to a historical event and how history documents it, which in turn takes us to Aristotle's discussion of poetry versus history. I then gave them a few lines by Aristotle on history versus poetry and his view about what is more universal, while explaining to them that poetry for Aristotle is not what we understand by poetry today, the lyric, but it means the entire realm of the imaginative and fictional. The students were involved, not that they really understood the convoluted language of Aristotle, but at least they came to understand the difference between two types of representations of the same event. One student came up with an image by a Bulgarian artist called Guernica in the Sea, 2015, which represents the Syrian tragedy and the flight of refugees in boats. This in turn brought up the image of the drowned toddler on the beach, who shook the conscience of Europe and made allowances for incoming refugees. In turn, this was the place to think how an image is worth 1,000 words, and the impact of the visual versus the verbal. These paired texts gave rise to other pairings the students themselves embarked on, some in class discussions and others in oral presentations. How to present a collective tragedy? Why does modern art deform bodies? What has this to do with art? How did the ancient Egyptians present their kings, queens, and gods? The newspaper testimony on Guernica is written in neutral terms. How would you present it lyrically in a poem? Could someone venture into creative writing that presents Guernica in a poetic text? Once this is done, whether in the form of a rhymed verse or a prose poem, then the issue will be what has the poem captured that the artist and the journalist, the painter and the historian did not? What has it dropped and what has it added? Not just in terms of information, but in terms of tone, of mood, of metaphors and similes, of irony and rhetorical devices. In such a case, or similar cases, we have to be prepared not to have a course schedule written in stone. A syllabus that is rigidly pre-structured. Yes, we need some structure, but it's difficult to tell in what direction the students will take such issues. Maybe no one will want to compose a poem for Guernica. Then what about a photograph that presents the bombed people, whether it's in a war or in a massacre, in Sabra and Shatila or in Vietnam? What is the difference between the photograph and the painting? To what extent graphic reality should be presented on stage? Why did the ancient Greeks refer but not show violence? The Acosta committing suicide and Oedipus blinding himself. What happens when we see images of violence in media? Do they add to our horror of wars and violence, or do they make us indifferent to the daily carnage? Do they normalize violence? Can we debate this in terms of what is going on today in Iraq or in Libya? Why violence in the first place? Clearly, many of these questions will lead to others, and some students will be interested in responding to some and not to others. But the point is to have a course that is student-centered. The course then will not be plotted like a narrative, or like history, or even like variations on a theme, but like Deleuze's rhizomes springing here and there. It is at this point that we can insert a canonical work, Sophocles' Oedipus Rex, and possibly Shakespeare's Othello, the Moor of Venice. Apart from the issue of violence in these two dramatic works, we can discuss the question of guilt. If one commits incest or parricide, and unknowingly, does this count as breaking a taboo or becoming a criminal? What is consciousness and what is the unconscious and the subconscious? I mean, one thing leads to the other. What do psychoanalysts mean by these terms? What were the flows of Oedipus and Othello? What did Aristotle say about the tragic hero? Is Othello's ending and Oedipus' ending their own fault or that of society and fate? This is, of course, in order to engage the students. This will definitely make the course more akin to a mobile than a structured course. And each time it's taught, the collective student body and its chemistry will make a difference in how the course goes. It is essential to my mind to let the flow of students' interest decide the direction and orientation of the course, while keeping in mind that every time we have a chance to underpin an issue by referring to a canonical text, be it philosophical, historical, or social science or natural science, we should do so. So we raise their interest and then we bring in a passage from a canonical text. It's more important to raise questions and admit there are no answers once for all, no definitive answers. What we want our students to do is be prepared to explore and find out, to search in our confusing world and try to interpret, even if not reaching a finalized answer. In the process, we hope to stimulate appetite, to taste and encourage the pleasure of wandering. It's clearly a case of an unmapped course, but not entirely. The students and the instructor will map a course together, and the new cartography is not a map for the next core curriculum course. It is valid for one time, like an installation. It's not like a permanent sculpture in an art museum or a cultural item in a folklore museum. It cannot be reproduced, but it can be remembered, and the memory can help us improve our next performance as instructors. Let us then look at teaching a core curriculum course in a liberal arts educational system as truly a joint effort by students and instructors, a collective enterprise that changes every time we walk in a classroom. Let us now look at the discontents of such an approach, having already discussed its benefits and strategies. Such a course cannot possibly include dozens of students in a big auditorium where an audience is lectured to. This is the ideal of university administrators who want to economize and count how many warm bodies the professor is teaching. The ratio of students to instructor has to be increased by all means possible to avoid budget deficiencies, we are constantly told. This is where the very idea of knowledge is seen as delivering information and insights from the knowledgeable professor to ignorant students. This model might have been relevant in the Middle Ages when manuscripts were not available to everyone, or even in our modern times in the 19th and 20th century, where the availability of books was confined to libraries, conditional on library membership. But now in our digital age, you can practically find anything on the net. The point is not finding it, but choosing among the plethora of such items what is more relevant and reliable. This element of intelligence choice is only possible by a student who can discern differences in quality. A student who has been trained not to be on the receiving end of a message, but a participant in composing the message. I would say that no more than 20 students per class can benefit from such a course. We at the American University in Cairo find in our classes a discrepancy between levels of students, from the outstanding to the mediocre. Some colleagues of mine advise that we should concentrate on the good students and aim our teaching to push them to their utmost potential, which effectively means ignoring or dismissing the other students and not trying to remedy their shortcomings. I am against this approach on the grounds that the so-called good students will manage to learn anyhow. It is the other students who are less gifted or less trained that need more help. In an introductory course in freshman core at AUC, that is possible since the cap is 20 students. For other elective courses under core curriculum that are meant for sophomore and juniors, even if we have more than 20 students, the class will function well, since the students have choice selecting their core courses. This is what Dr. Switzer talked about as the second level of core. So they are not going to take my course on global literature in English or introduction to literature unless they are interested in it. And thus 25 to 30 students, interested student in a given topic can work. What I think is not working well at AUC is the requirement of each and every student to take a senior CAP seminar in a discipline other than what he or she is majoring in. To have students take a course with me, for example, I'm given such capstones, selected topics for ECLT aimed at majors in English and comparative literature, sitting with students who are not majoring in literature and may not have taken many courses in literature, such as from accounting or engineering, is a formula for disjunction. I know you taught Heidegger and you had students from accounting. I don't know how you did it. You're a miracle worker, Robert. I have had this problem with my advanced courses of selected topics. I had one course, a selected topic on Edward Said, and another one on sacred and profane love in the Middle Ages. Students from other disciplines not connected to literature signed for them, since I believe they have heard of the iconic figure of Edward Said, so they want to take a course on him. Or are interested in a course that advertises itself as a course on love, but they're not prepared to handle the material that English and comparative literature majors do. Such courses are meant for seniors, these capstones, and even graduates may hope to take one or two of these advanced undergraduate courses. This creates a gap that cannot be bridged. That I like to appeal to Dean Switzer to reconsider such courses or rethink about them. I also would like to know, what do you do in other institutions? Do you have capstone courses, mixing, majors? At AUC, we have Core 1 aimed at first-year students, which I teach regularly, in which students come from different high schools, but all are confronting the university for the first time. In Core 2, students choose and alternate between middle-level courses in humanities and social sciences. So the very fact that they are opting for a given course in my department rather than in any other means their interest in the topic. As for core 3 for seniors, that's the capstone, I believe mixing non-majors and majors is in an advanced course is a formula for trouble. I would of course like to know how others handle such issue. To summarize, I believe what AUB is doing in convening a workshop based on experience in the core is most welcome. Instead of blueprints or manifestos on how to teach core curriculum in liberal arts universities, we are here to discuss our concrete experiences. Needless to say, what I'm proposing means a detour from the usual scheduled syllabus. It means more work for the instructor as there is no preconceived structure. But that does not mean it's not structured. It gets its structure, the course gets its structure as it is implemented with the help of the students. We have to think of a preliminary structure and order a few textbooks for it or locate them on internet without violating copyrights, of course. But above all, we should be willing to make changes as we go along, taking in consideration where the collective student body is veering. I myself have sensed that students love to watch a performance. And since we have an active department of the arts at AUC, where the theatre unit offers every semester a play performed by students, I try to put the play on the syllabus and also provide the text of the play in reserve section. Surely the students enjoy Molière's Tartuffe or Miller's The Crucible, but they need to also look up the text for their essays. At times, some of my students are actually involved in the play, either by acting or by handling other aspects of the performance. So they have a chance to tell the class what it's like, what's an audition, how staging works, etc. On the whole, I find my freshman students are very good with PowerPoint presentations and are confident in displaying images and YouTubes. So I call on that. If not so sure of themselves, then I have 2 students share an oral presentation. I believe that we should make use of what the students are good at and listen to their interests, adding from their subculture to our canonical choices. This is what I meant by pairing as a pedagogic strategy. We pair the high culture with the low culture without insinuating or imposing a hierarchy. The elite and scholarly works along with popular items. One complements the other and one enriches the other. Cultural studies cannot be isolated in an ivory tower. We need to explore the quotidian, the daily, while reading the classics. Thank you for your listening.
Thank you very much, Fadia, Dr. Azur. We'll take, I think we can take 15 minutes for questions, since we started 20 minutes late.
Sorry, thank you so much for that sharing of one possible pedagogical approach, which the student-centered approach, which, as you say, has it's just condensed, but it has very much its own benefits as well. Just because you asked the question of how other institutes may do things, so I have, if I may, a question to you as well. One of the things we still do at the Civilization Studies program for all sections in the core courses, what we call the core courses, is to have a general lecture on a particular text or a topic, but generally it's a text or an author. So if one is to go through the approach of the student-centered approach, where flexible structure, as you so well put it, that would mean at some level that kind of goes out the window. To have general lectures introducing new readings, etc. So my question, if I may, is one: do you at AUC have a common lecture approach or a general lecture approach? And the second is, which also is part of our reasoning for general lectures, and particularly in multi-sectional courses, is if one does away with the common lectures, and if one does away with structure as such, as syllabus, does one also do away with equity across the sections in a multi-sectional course, from your own experience and opinion, please? Thank you.
You know, when I started teaching in the freshman core, we had exactly what you said, that different professors, we were about 9 or 10, and different professors would give a lecture on their specialty and so on. Now, what happened is that the level of the lecture was above the head of the students. And I think, you know, intentionally or unintentionally, the professors talked to their colleagues rather than to the students. So, you know, then it will be open for questions. There will be very few students who, you know, in that big auditorium will raise their hand and ask a question. So it's not an intimate way of teaching, I think, okay? And now the idea of the lecture is, you know, now you can find lectures. You can find lectures on videos. You can find lectures on anything, you know. They are already there, you know. You don't need, you know, someone to do that. But what we did in the sections is, you know, each instructor would then take the students and explain to them more or less what the lecture was on and how it works and answer their questions and so on. And we'll ask them to write essays. They used to write a number of essays, more than the usual requirements, because they got 6 credits for such a course each semester and so on. So there was no way of controlling, you know. I mean, ultimately it's the professor who decides, you know, how to explain the lecture further and how to grade and so on. So the idea of, you know, having one standard for all was not there, except that, you know, everyone listened to the same lecture. And I don't think it was very useful, and after a while, you know, we changed it to some other format.
Thank you very much, Fiyan. This is a question that does not really straight to what you have been saying, but I wanted to ask about the environment in Egypt. Now, you see, like AUB teaches in English. This is the language of instruction. My question is, and you have total liberty and freedom in choosing the curriculum, and the pieces that you want to present, and everything that you want to explain to the students. My question is, have you been giving this course in Arabic, not in English? You think you would have had some kind of big brother overlooking your shoulders what you are teaching?
Yeah. You know, we discussed this, I think, earlier about censorship, that Judith asked that question and so on. We had a case, I don't know if you know about it, is teaching Muhammad Shukri for bread alone. It was taught by my colleague in the Department of Arabic Studies in Arabic, Al-Khubz al-Hafi, okay? And I taught it before in English. Before she taught it, I was teaching it in my department, the Department of English and Comparative Literature, and no one objected. But when she taught it in Arabic, what happened is that some of the students, maybe they were discussing it with their uncles or their parents or something, and they said, what, you know, what are you reading, you know, and so on. So people, when we were trying to defend the right of Dr. Samia Bahas to teach the course, you know, the idea was, well, you can teach these things in English, but not in Arabic, you know. And in the core, the freshman core, as we had it before, you know, in the early period, in the early 80s, you know, we used to teach, you know, Freud. We used to teach all kinds of works, you know, that are, in a sense, daring, you know, not traditional and so on. And then when we came to teach, for example, season of migration to the north, I had one of the students complain because there's this old woman, you know, who talks about her love affairs and what she did when she had sex and so on. So I told them, I said, why do you mind this and you don't mind, you know, the other works that we have read, you know, Madame Bovary or whatever, you know. Ah, they said, you know, they are not ours. They can do that, you know. And this is, you know, a Muslim writer, and you shouldn't, you know, you shouldn't engage in this and so on. And the same thing, I had that experience also, you know, when I teach Chaucer, okay? And Chaucer was an anti-Semite, no matter what you think, you know. And some of the stories are against Jews and, you know, what they do, they bake their bread with blood of the, or, you know, of others, of Christians and so on. So then, there are other works that I teach, like Dante, for example, the 28th canto of Othello, which is against the prophet and the presentation of the prophet and so on. They object to the prophet. I say, why don't you object to the others as well? Or they say, this is ours, you know, this is what we have to object to. I mean, the idea there, you're right, you know, there are certain things that somehow trigger, they are more sensitive when they are done in Arabic than when they are done in English, or when the writer is a Muslim writer or an Arab writer than something else and so on. But what I do when I teach these things, I mean, I don't think you should really censor works. I try to explain to them, you know, this was the medieval understanding of what Islam is, you know. I mean, they did not know Islam as we know it now, you know. They thought it has a trinity too, that they adored Apollo, that, you know, the prophet was actually a cardinal that broke away from the Christian. So you explain this to them, and then you introduce to them the canto itself, for example. And the same things, of course, about sexuality, you know, Chaucer, the Merchant's Tale, the Miller's Tale, and so on. You know, you have to explain to them and ask them, you know, do you mind, you know, if people mention explicitly sexual things and so on?
Yeah, Peter, I don't want to monopolize, but I'd like to ask a parallel question, because this is something we discussed in the morning.
Yes.
If so, are we saying that the virtues of liberal education and the objectives of liberal education are confined to foreign language institutions in this part of the world? I mean, is it something which is confined to AUC and AUB and other universities that teach in English? I mean, if we believe in the importance of liberal education and humanities and so on, then how do we cut across to the other side of the equation for national universities in an environment which is still autocratic and not democratic, in which you don't have that freedom that otherwise we enjoy? I mean, I thought this was the question that we have not discussed, but to my mind, it's very, very important, because that same question is answered in economics also. That why is it that development in the Arab world has been distorted? It's precisely because of the influence of political systems that exist. So I thought that just, you know, to expand on this theme.
Yes, I mean, in the national university, in the state universities, I don't know in Lebanon, but certainly in Egypt, they don't have a core curriculum. You know, they're more of the system of specializing, you know, so they don't have this kind of general education and so on. But I want to say about the distortion of education and of intellectual things and so on. I mean, we're going backwards, you know. There was a time when a scholar in Egypt in 1937 could write an article saying why I am an atheist. I mean, now it's impossible to think of someone who could write something like this. And there was a sheikh from the Azhar who answered very logically, you know, how can you prove there is no God, and so on and so on. So there was a different kind of argument and so on. And now it seems to me it's fanaticism, you know, that's taking over, you know. What we can do, I mean, we are only teaching a few students compared to the millions, you know, that there are and so on, is trying to push for people to understand that, you know, there are differences, and differences are enriching, and there are different ways of saying something, and so on. So yes, we do have, I think, a kind of liberty because you are teaching in English. I mean, I can say from the reactions, you know, people that say, you can say it in English, but you can't say it in Arabic, you know.
How many people still have questions, just to see? Okay. By the way, the topic is going to be discussed in the panel, Dr. Makdisi, about the use of language.
I just have one question.
I wasn't here.
I noticed that you said that the students, when they're given the chance to be engaged in the classroom, they'll kind of react differently. But there's a problem that I face in my classes. No matter how much engaged they might get, in the end, it's the outcome, the grade that they want. And that's very challenging. Even though they enjoy, they still cannot compromise the fact that they want a high grade, they're on probation, or they're on a certain scholarship, or they just are fixated on the fact that we need a grade. And that's how they choose courses. They come and they tell you, oh, we know that this course is easy, or we've been told by other students that this particular instructor gives high grades, so that's why we took the course. Now, regardless of the content, okay, this is another issue that we have to constantly confront with our students. And I was wondering, is it the same thing? Is it the problem that we are forcing them to take this particular course, or is it just the way, the system of the whole university and the grading system and collecting GPAs and stuff? Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, we raised this question with Patricia Glebe and so on. Now, I'm of the opinion that, of course, you know, you have to grade them in the requirements for their major. You know, they have to be able to pass Calculus 1 and 2 before they can graduate in a department of mathematics and so on. But it seems to me that what we had before at AUC, which is pass and fail, is something that would liberate them from this, you know. Of course, if they don't do the work, they're going to fail. I mean, not everyone is going to pass, you see. But at least we should give them at least one course, and in my own belief that it should be this core curriculum, where they are not thinking of grades, where they are thinking of the pleasure of learning, where they are thinking of the joys of discovering something, when they have a say, you know, like Paulo Freire said about the pedagogy of the oppressed. You know, you have to get them to do it, not do it for them and get them to do it and so on. So I think this is where I believe that in a course like this, okay, Patricia said maybe they won't do their maximum. Well, I mean, I'm not interested in their maximum. I'm interested in instilling in them that there is joy, there is passion, there is pleasure in learning, you know, because we want them to be learning all their life, you know, min al-mahd ila al-lahd, you know. So that's what I think there should be at least one course like this, you know, that will not be competitive in terms of getting, you know, a grade and so on.
If I may interject here, just you know, our problem is that we get students from high schools here,
yes,
where they have sort of courses that are not really important for the back, and that perhaps is one great source of why we have disruptions in the class. Why it takes time to just explain to an incoming student that they can't just sit and talk and do whatever they like. So unfortunately, culturally speaking, here, in my experience, students who come from high schools where such things have happened, then not just it then really depends on if the person teaching can really grab them. So what we have done, what we have been doing in our program is we've said in multi-section courses, we say the overall average for each section, you know, it used to be 65, Samir, where was he still here, Samir? Then it went to 70, and it went to 75, now it's kind of more, you know, like 78 in our system, in other words. So in other words, if a teacher doesn't respect that, then that person has to kind of be asked either to do it or, you know, it's unfair. So that is a sort of a midway solution of avoiding the problem. Now this problem came up with us at AUB when we stopped having 4 required courses in CVSP. Now they shop around for the Humanities course that has a reputation for a high grade. When the program is working properly, having a set thing for everyone was a kind of an inter thing between just, if there's no grade, it's really hard to get them to take it seriously. Then the teacher really has to, as you're saying, and, that could happen, but it doesn't, when you have many teachers and many students, it's not manageable, but it could be. It's an ideal. I always tell my students, I wish I didn't have to grade you, but I have to grade you.
Well, I think it's natural that students and everyone else want to maximize their interests, and that includes, of course, grades in the case of students and so on. But I think if you have at least one course where this is not an issue, you mean they will not work? But if you ask them, if you have discussions in class and so on, to my mind, they come up with it. It's not necessarily that they don't read and so on. That's why I say we don't give them too much to read. We give them less to read, but we read closely. And at the same time, we try to trigger their interest. What do you think of this? What do you think of that? And so on, so that they are engaged. It's not easy because I know that the subculture, they have to check if they have gotten a text message or their telephones and so on. We are going in a way against the grain, but this is where we as instructors have to be able to engage them in something, and we can only engage them in something if it's relevant to them. If it's not relevant to them, they're not going to talk about it naturally.
Okay, then thank you very much. Nadia is not here. I think the way the schedule is that supposedly coffee will be brought into this particular room so that we could go on with the panel.
Whoever would like a coffee, please help yourself and bring it back so we can
Let's
just
take
catch up.
as brief a break as possible so that...
No.
Yeah, in other words, a brief... As little time is lost there as your colleagues told. I do my job. I personally have been very much enriched by everything I've heard today, and I think many of you have been here much of the day. What I thought would be normal is for those who have been here, if you have something that you really want to start this with, please be thinking about that as I introduce the topic. The topic was positionalities, meaning primarily, let's now try to see what does it mean that we are, that AUB is here in Beirut, Cairo or near Cairo. What does that mean in terms of the way we approach the core curriculum? And that has been referred to all through today, of course. So now let's see if we can bring it together and see if people would like to say something definite about it. The tension between the local and the universal, primarily we're talking about humanities, and so inevitably one tries, at least that's been all of my understanding. Whatever I do, I try to see what is both local and global, and that, and trying to help them to see that which is simply purely local, and that which, and how even that, if you really look at it, could be universal. When we started our program, we had a professor who used to say that, gave us that, I'm sure you've all heard that slogan, but cultures are many, man is one. Basically, let's look for our common humanity in all of the texts that we're looking at. And that's one way primarily of looking at understanding what is meant by if you have to use the word classic or the horrible word canon or whatever, as far as I'm concerned, it's always been, is this a living text? Is this a text that speaks to people? We are trying it out. We can see if it doesn't work, if it doesn't have any life in it, it'll show you. It'll roll over dead. If it does have life, can we help them to see how that is there? And from that point of view, then there's no limit to what we could bring into the syllabus. And the richer, the better. The more truly global, the better. My problem in starting this discussion today about, for those of you, what do you think about what we should be doing, primarily here in the Middle East, because really that's what we're talking about, AUC and the UB and the various universities here, Parliament and all that. How should we be handling this challenge of not wanting to be seen as Western-oriented, although that's very difficult because much of our program here includes Islam, and so at least at that level. How should we go about that? And how's the balance between what Richard mentioned previously, if you were here, when that I think we're primarily all agreed on what we'd like to do is to get them to be critical thinkers. And if I'm allowed to make just one bit of a comment, I've tried over the years to get, after I left graduate school and all of that, to make it as communicable to students who are coming in who don't have much background. And I tell them, as far as I am concerned, critical thinking, the slogan we use, is quite variegated. Different teachers will understand it differently, but very simply, humanly speaking, it involves empathy and evaluation. And so empathy for me has always meant to help them see you've got to get into that text, let that text speak to you, realize that text has humans behind it. That's why I can use the word empathy. You're not just being empathetic with a book. You know, as Descartes says, when you read books from the past, it's like having a dialogue with people there. So trying to instill this into them, that whatever text you're doing, that we, criticize us. If we put this text here, it means something important to some human beings, fellow human beings. So at one and the same time, I found living in the Middle East now, and with the wars, with all the changes that have happened, that I've always felt that this, the core curriculum, let's call CVSP, cannot avoid the mandate of having to try to bring these disparate people, when they step out of the confines of this campus, are involved in all the political mess that's around and all the things there. So what can we do in whatever we choose to look at? How can we best help them to come into this critical thinking through, first of all, really starting to take seriously the text itself, trying as much as possible not to give them an interpretation that comes from either Heidegger or from some other special thing, but try to get them to read the text, see what's in there, what's the text saying, self-reflective text we have always taken as a criterion for text. They have to be self-respective. If they don't give you a way of interpreting the text itself, then we haven't really kept them in the program. So, but then evaluation is very, very important. And then the more you do that, the more you are already evaluating. But then the more you're in a position to seriously then agree, disagree, or what I try to train them to do, tell them the three main virtues are humility, humility, and humility, either with Socrates or whoever else has taught you. Recognize your own ignorance, wherever, no matter how high up you get there, you're still ignorant, there's still so much more of this topic. And then just, say, well, I need to study this book more. So here's an instigation to go off from what you're doing here, to go up and do more. Because we can never do it all for ourselves. We're joking, we think we can. And now that we at AUB, we have this problem which you don't have at AUC or perhaps some of these other universities, and one would like to hear that each one of you tell us what you do there. We have a problem is that now we're only 2 courses. And we have no freshman preparation. People, they're thrown into our courses. We used to know that with 201, 202, we had primary sophomore year people. Now you get seniors, juniors, people from all over. So we've lost any kind of so we are in a position where Nietzsche has hammered us. But I totally agree with everything you've been saying about Nietzsche, by the way. I love him precisely because of the things you've been mentioning. It's because now the duty, God is dead, you have to be dead. Well, you have to be God. I mean, you have to now take a look at this rubble and see how you're going to produce. But we're at that stage. I think here at AUB, we're at the stage of, we've been hammered away at this program for various reasons, the war, et cetera, et cetera. And now we're in this kind of a situation. So I think all of us from AUB have learned a lot from just listening to everything here today. And I'd like now to just ask the people in this particular panel to say, well, what do you think finally about, well, of course I'm concerned for AUB, but for if you have something to tell us from the other universities, we haven't had a chance to tell us, on this particular challenge really, the positionality, the fact that we are here in the Middle East, that the situation is what it is, we're getting the kind of students we're getting, our mandate is not to immediately give them very high-level stuff, but to deal with something that can satisfy somebody, a high-level person, but also to deal not to, the herd is important, the masses are important, the pop culture is important. How do we handle that? So I'm opening the floor to anyone who would like to pursue that. If you have other specificities you'd like to talk about, we really depend on you as a panel now.
I'd like to just move or raise the issue of this morning's discussion by going back to the question of the core curriculum as opposed to what we do in CS at the moment, which, as Peter has said, has been reduced to 2 courses. And to go back to the question of who decides what the principles of decision are, general education, it was not in our hands, in fact, it was decided, I'm not quite sure how, but what that has allowed, I'm going to be just as quick as I can, is that the Dean of Arts and Sciences, who has not been represented here today at all, for very good reasons, has promoted English and philosophy as departments that offer alternative humanities. Once you said that the requirement of humanities is no longer 4 CS courses, but 2 CS courses and 2 humanities, then the other humanities departments were justifiably promoted. And there was always a difficulty of retaining faculty in the English and philosophy. So our position now, I'm afraid, being negative, is I don't actually see why we should exist any longer. I mean, what do we do that's different from what English does and what philosophy does? So, unfortunately, the discussion that started in the morning about general education, about core curriculum, what it means for the whole university, what it means for the faculty, as far as numbers are concerned, I think you're talking of something like 8 courses. Is that right?
For Columbia?
For Columbia.
Well, if you count the year-long courses as semesters, then it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and so 8, yes, plus, science, so 11.
Plus.
University writing, 12, and foreign language.
You're talking about something completely different from...
And swimming.
Do you need any teaching assistants?
So the second session after lunch was more about the canon, and the lecture we've just heard has been more about the canon. I mean, the problem is we changed our name from Civilization Sequence to Civilization Studies. Why? Because we had doubts about canon. If we are serious about teaching civilization studies, then how do we go about that? Speaking as an anthropologist here, I mean, that opens the door. I think I've said enough.
Now that Nader is here, let's just take a minute to have each one very quickly introduce yourself. Bana, Ali,
Hi, my name is Bana Bashir. I'm Associate Professor of Philosophy here at AUB. I guess my research interests are philosophy of action, moral psychology, and I guess meta-ethics. And I'm really interested in a broad range of non-philosophy and interdisciplinary work. Most recently, I've published, co-published a paper on philosophy and economics with a colleague in the economics department. So I'd like to learn stuff.
Hi, my name is Alexis Wick. I teach in the history. I'm an assistant professor in the history and archaeology department here at AUB. And I deal mainly with the Ottoman and Arab histories, as well as the history of the sea.
I'm Wahid Mahmardi, member of the Department of Humanities at AU. I'm Associate Professor of Classical Arabic Literature and Comparative Literature.
Well, I'm Peter Shbeya, if anybody doesn't know me. I'm supposed to be the Associate Director at CVSP, and my whole life was in theatre until recently as well.
I'm Jihad Touma. I'm a professor of physics here at the UB. And I like to draw freely from Al-Nifari, Abu Nuwas, Omar al-Khayyam, Al-Mutanabbi, in teaching about optics, perturbation theory, and many such things physically.
I'm Shadi Rahmi. I'm an assistant professor of philosophy at NDU. And I want to say I'm glad to be here because when I was here, like many years ago, I did my BS in computer science and I was studying psychology too. And I graduated from both, but the CS program, and I still remember your lectures, by the way. The CS program got me into philosophy and eventually got my PhD into philosophy. My focus is on symbolism.
Somebody likes this.
My name is Hani Hassan. I'm an instructor both at the Civilisation Studies program at the Philosophy Department and an alumnus of this university when we still had the 4 CVSP courses.
Richard Smith, in historical anthropology, I've worked in India and with my wife in Jordan on 19th century land records.
Okay, perhaps we could hear from someone from another institution. So, would you like to say something?
Thank you, Dr. Shbeya. Of course, after listening to what Dr. Smith says, I think
this is not working. It was working. We use this one's better.
I thought after listening to what Dr. Smith mentioned, which was quite pessimistic, there is nothing to say about, in fact, the future of CS, but let's try. I think, you know, we are facing a problem and a challenge. I remember when I was an undergraduate student here at the UP in the early 80s, we were obliged to take 4 CS courses. Gradually, in the recent years, this has been reducing. Now, I believe students are required to take only 2 courses. In my university now at AU, they are required to take only 1 CS course, and it might also become an optional free elective. So definitely we have this problem, but it's good to know that there is a professor of philosophy who in fact changed his major after taking a course in cultural studies or CS. So this is promising also. But I have a few questions, putting aside the pessimistic perspective. First, what do we mean by, in fact, cultural studies within an American university in the Middle East? In fact, the speaker, when she mentioned geographical factors, I think it's very important and essential, while in fact considering our CS programs. And also, probably we should ask ourselves, what is the culture that we want our students to learn before graduation? This is also an essential issue. And who makes that decision? Also, I think now we are living in a world which is very much open to itself. So in classical terms, we have something which can be considered or classified as Western culture, Middle Eastern culture, Asian and Far Eastern culture. So there are many cultures. Does really our program reflect this global culture? Do we have something? Do our students know much or anything about Indian or Chinese culture when they are graduated? even, I mean, you know, when they are studying at an American university in the Near East, AUB or LEU or NDU or these universities that maintain an American style in their education. Even, I mean, those students who study in these particular universities, when they graduate, are they cultured, let's say, in Turkish culture, in Persian culture, in North African culture? I think these are issues that can be considered while, in fact, reviewing our programs. Do our students end up cultured with the existing CS curriculum in American-style universities in the Middle East? What about the geographical factors? Is it reflected in the existing CS programs that we have? How can we combine between national cultures and global cultures in our programs nowadays? So this is also an issue, I think, that can be discussed to see how much we need, because in fact the distinguished speaker mentioned, you know, national cultures and the global culture that we are living in now. So how can we combine all these together at a time when, in fact, we have a problem with the students' attitude towards cultural studies as a requirement? I mean, a student of, let's say, business comes and says, why should I read Gilgamesh? A student of business comes, once came and told me why he should read Romeo and Juliet. He's doing business. I told him then probably you should read Merchant of Venice in that case. So we have a problem with, in fact, the students' attitude when they are doing majors which have nothing to do with culture or literature or humanities, and they are being forced to take courses which are, in their opinion, not relevant to their major. What does it mean? This is, you know, the first question. How can we make our students realize that when they are, that what we want them to be is cultured, in fact, students, rather than people who are only specialized in very particular fields of learning? This is, you know, a brief contribution, Dr. Schweiger.
Thank you.
Any anxieties I had about being on this panel were amplified by Richard's existential statement to get us started. I feel I'm barging in on an internal conversation. And I'm also sorry not to see many more scientists, students actually involved in this discussion. They're, after all, on the receiving end of many of the supposed critical skills that you, as a program, are attempting to inculcate into students. I certainly see very little of that in the discussions of the current generations of students. And in fact, it is my pestering them about skills of reading, close reading, writing, and interpolating various sources, texts, references, that I presume any university students should be upon or interested in or motivated by. I was saying it's because I pestered them so much about these things that first I had to inquire about what they're actually learning in their civilization sequence courses, and then actually engaged with them over lengthy discussions about the offerings and their implications for their education, actually their education as an adventure rather than a process of, what should I say, imposition of certain practices that may not extend beyond the course that they actually take with you guys. So what I noticed is one that students, not noticed actually, it's actually a sort of informal survey. Students may do very well in your courses, but mostly they want to get done with them. They feel that they're being asked to engage with things that they were happy to leave behind in high school. And now that they are entering into specialties involving hard sciences, math, physics, which they would like to celebrate, they would like not to be bothered with the offerings in some of the courses. It's certainly not true of all of them. Some of the students were very excited by the dialogical exercises they go through in courses on philosophy in particular. They found that these courses give them space to engage in rational discussions, which they enjoy. And they felt that they also allowed them to raise or ask questions about epistemology, which are helpful in relationship to the disciplines that they are part of. So that's something they found very exciting and they'd like to see more of. And they found that the approach in some of the civilization sequence, is it, or studies, or CS, yes, it's a CS. Yeah, computer science. It's a CS. So some of the offerings in these courses were, because of the variety of material that has to be covered, ended up menu-like, offering them packaged knowledge rather than material with which to engage. And here I'm just reporting the outcome of a very recent discussion which I undertook with a very bright group of people in preparation for this panel, of course. I did my research. What else? What I found striking in this discussion actually is the emphasis on the relationship between science and religion in the mind of my students. And what I found remarkable is that many of them made breakthroughs in relationship to these issues, less in relationship to CS courses, and more in relationship to, say, literature courses or philosophy courses. So one student, an extremely bright student, with whom I share trips on van number 4 from the Tayuni area, said that on one of her trips she read a short story which for her was a starting point of serious reflection, engagement, and risk-taking in relationship to ideas that she had not experienced before. That quality of risk-taking is what I like to see expressed in my students in relationship to the sciences. And this is precisely what I feel is lacking in relationship to the courses that they generally encounter in the humanities. So this is as far as student experience is concerned. Generally a wish to get over with things, a wish to move on to other things, a sense that the declared aims of the programs are not translating in relationship to their practice as scientists. I tell them much of what we do as researchers in physics and mathematics is read and write. This is what we do. For them, they still live with the notion that somehow knowledge is final. I find that extremely surprising. That it's not constructed through a lineage with the various people contributing to that knowledge. Encouraging them in a rhizomic fashion. And I was going to say that the next leave I will take in AUC and make sure to spend time in Dr. Azul's course. This rhizomic approach to knowledge is drastically missing. The presence of the web is just a fiction when it comes to actually taking on one's educational adventure and building it piece by piece. We can study electromagnetism, but nobody cares about Faraday. Nobody cares about the context in which he worked and the amazing feats he had to go through, his relationship to his community, how he was perceived. The whole sociology of knowledge production is missing. So we have to work against that, and I somehow rely on you guys to help, but perhaps it's because we are, as teachers, missing from the conversation. You don't get our feedback, you don't get our wish list, that we're not seeing eye to eye. So in some sense, I'm particularly disappointed with what I'm seeing in my students when it comes to the skills that such programs aim to provide. As to reasons why, solutions, I have no idea. I'm sure everyone is trying to do their best. I just have one thing to say on that. I don't think that a program that wishes to establish a rhizomic point of view on knowledge, which is currently somehow endowed by the availability of information, by the web. Okay, so the web nature of knowledge dissemination and production is not served by the notion of a core program, for instance. That term, core program, is problematic. That's if you ask my opinion. The notion that you can actually put together your idea of what constitutes an ideal or a mythic figure at the turn of 21st century is problematic to me. This is something that can only be produced in discussion. And to allow that to happen, my personal point of view is, okay, what you have is amazing talent, obviously. I spent my time discussing with some of this talent. People with passions, dreams, wishes to articulate their own point of view and to canonize texts that they feel are interesting to them in this moment. I think this is what is worthwhile engaging in. Such programs are about the people who are part of them. They are not about somebody's idea of what this program is about. They are shaping the program. Every time you hire someone, you're hiring the possibility of a deformation, of a perturbation. And I think what is needed is to actually just leave them alone. Give them the space to go as far as they want. Somebody mentioned, I think it was you, how T.S. Eliot canonized Donne. That's interesting. He wrote about it. Okay, so I would like our faculty in the sciences, in mathematics, in the humanities, to canonize things as they go along. Yeah, we are a canonization factory. And we do it, and we change it, and we go out of it, so that the canon ceases to have any of its significance except through the discussions and the practice of the people who are present at a given phase in the history of the institution. That is something I would like to see happening. One last bit. I think it was William Blake who dreamt of capturing infinity in an hour. I think every hour we have with students in the context of your program that doesn't seek, attempt to capture that infinity, even a brief glimpse of that infinity, is a wasted hour. Thank you.
I don't know what to add after this, but I want to add a few things that I was hearing throughout the day. First, let's start with the question: what do we want to communicate to our students? And I would say the question of first in NDU we have the same. We have 2 human thought program, and now with the new LAC distribution of courses, we thought we were fighting to keep them, but we'll end up having more, hopefully. So it's going to be ending, it's going to get its final shape very soon, before the end of this year. But the question is, what sorts of values do we want to communicate to our students? What sort of graduate student do we want? I believe our challenge in this area, we spoke about different places in the area, our challenge is that we want a citizen first, not a subordinate, not a subject. We want a citizen. And of course, what sorts of values are we willing to communicate to that citizen? And I would say number one would be humility, because it's openness to other cultures. It prevents the fanaticism that you spoke about, Dr. Rasool. By the way, I enjoyed it because also this is what I've been trying to do with my students. I've been, I would say unwillingly, unhappily, I have to admit it, but I've been minimizing the readings and going in depth more, because I started to learn that, not in a pessimistic way, but I learned that I would need to start my class with no expectations. Unfortunately, we're not reading enough anymore, we're not interested in these topics, just like you said, and many students would come and say, why do you want this? And because we call it human thought, so I say, because you're human. And because you have a thought, you think, and you're human. And I start with a series of questions throughout the themes that would go a little bit by the themes that we're going to go through, trying to link them together from session one, and then sending students to do some interviews with their colleagues and create their own questions, come with their questions to me first, and collect answers from other interviews. And one thing that I found very helpful is to continue with them through weekly reflections. They start by writing simply what we spoke about, what we discussed, but at the end of the semester, it ends up creating someone, or creating first they keep it in a journal, so it's not just a paper. And at the end, they can read what they've been writing, and I can see whenever I go back to the beginning and then to the end that they've been really reflecting, they've been asking questions. Sometimes they ask to see me at the office hours to talk about their reflections. And I tell them, your reflections are confidential. So sometimes they speak about their private life, they link their interests, their modern, contemporary interests with what we're taking. And I believe this is the core thing about having such a program. It's about trying to have a graduate who knows how to think about things other than their specialty. Because we're not machines at the end of the day, we are human beings. And what's going on around us in the area, it's very sad, but it's helping us get our students back on track and telling them, you know, if you want to go as a machine to become specialized, fanaticism is not just because you don't know how to study. And I give them examples. I mean, many people from those who started, like, who were part of 9/11 were very highly educated. It's not just about knowing or getting degrees, it's about being human. And I believe this is our challenge. I don't know if I'm answering or if I'm going way straight from what we're discussing, but I believe this is what, those are the thoughts that I've been thinking of when I was listening to all the discussions, and this is what I have to say. Thank you.
So I'm just going to start with the heading of this panel and take it from there, because I think the heading in addressing it will reiterate a number of issues that have indeed come up during the day, and a number of challenges as well, and some of the things that were already also mentioned about our students. Where we are, I think, is the heading for this panel. And permit me to start with two anecdotes from my students. One in which, teaching CVSP 202, which is a course recently entitled, Monotheistic Thought from Late Antiquity to the Early Renaissance or the Classics. And I was introducing the first session, I was introducing the material, which goes from St. Augustine to Ghazali to Ibn Safa, all the way down to Dante's Purgatory. And so in introducing some of the questions, I said, well, you know, key issues we're going to be encountering over the semester. What is God? Is there God? What is the relation of one towards the divine? And I was getting into it when a student suddenly stood up, slightly red in the face, and he says, you cannot ask these questions. And I said, I can, actually, and I'm hoping that soon you too can. And he didn't drop the course. And by the end of the course, he was actually asking these questions, perhaps in his own way, trying to tone down my way, and Augustine's way, and Al-Ghazali's way, all in one. Which I thought was a really interesting start to the semester, did set the tone for that semester. Another quick anecdote I'll share, and all this, by the way, in me trying to say where we are in a very roundabout way. A student was asking me, so it wasn't a student of my section or any course I was teaching, but the student was asking about possible courses she could take, and she had taken a sequence 1, so I was talking about 203 and 204, and she asked me what 204 covers, and I said, well, you know, contemporary thought from Darwin, and but you also have Arab authors, you have Tayyib Saleh and Naguib Mahfouz, and she said, oh, no, I don't want to read Jumlat Khali Jumlat. Jumlat Khali Jumlat. I thought, all right, yeah, probably, okay. It is partly where we are. And a final anecdote I'll share, but not from our students, and not as regards our students, but again, where we are. A student came to me almost in tears one day because we had assigned an exam, what I call written evaluation, on Friday, and so he came to speak to me on Wednesday. And he said, I can't make it to the exam. And I said, what do you mean you can't make it to the exam? He said, I can't. I said, well, why not? Are you not prepared? It's still Wednesday. He said, no, my engineering teacher assigned an extra session. And I said, but you have an exam. He said, yeah. And I said, but even if we didn't have an exam, that's our regular scheduled class time. Did you not tell him that? And he said, of course I did. And I said, and? He said, well, it's just a yes. Yes. And these are just kind of some sample things of where we are. But of course, it does also lead to what we do, and is there anything we can still do? I obviously still very strongly believe there is something this program does. I very honestly believe there is much to be done other than what we actually do. But that is an argument, that is a discussion, that is a big discussion, I think, to be had, and I think this is one of the great things about today's discussions. Yes, GE seems to have been now the reference for us. When I was thinking about core curriculum being presented from Columbia or from AUC for that matter, I was thinking of the GE program at AUB. I wasn't thinking of the CVSP program. Because in the GE program, we have quantitative thought requirements, we have qualitative, we have writing intensive, we have English language and other languages if you wish, and we have the humanities. The humanities is just one component. To my mind, the civilization studies is the component of the humanities. And not because I don't think philosophy or English or history can do what humanities do. No, I just think that because what CS could do is a bit of all of that. Because in one course you have Dante alongside Ikhwan al-Safa, alongside Ibn Rushd, alongside, and I think that still could have value. Please do not press me on articulating that value right now, and I think that's the whole purpose of this discussion. But certainly flexibility. I mean, I think we really need to think of, and I've been trying to do that in certain sections, certainly student-centered approaches. Definitely. At one point we had we have what we call course designers or instructional designers from the academic computing centers attend a couple of our common lectures and give us feedback. And the first point was, you could hear that on any podcast. The students can go on podcasts now. They can go on audiocasts. They can go on, what is that? The one edX, I think. The open source. No, not that TED. The one, I think, done through Harvard, where you can register courses on justice and really big courses. And they're there, right? And so, yes, of course we really need to rethink what we're doing. But rethink and possibly think of new pedagogical approaches and pairing and otherwise, definitely.
Can I ask a question?
No, go ahead.
Hani, could you tell me please, because you teach philosophy. You teach philosophy and you teach CS. Can you tell me please the difference between teaching in CS and teaching in philosophy? You're teaching Plato. How do you teach it in CS and how do you teach it in philosophy? This is an answer to
Dr. Smith, who just said that what is the use of teaching in CS if we take these courses in philosophy? Please.
I will certainly not profess to answer the question raised earlier, but I will certainly say I've taught the Republic in 3 different contexts. I've taught it in CVSP 201 or 205. I've also taught it in the classics, philosophical classics, in philosophy. And I've also taught it in utopian thought, which is also a CVSP thematic course. Not only do I not teach it the same across the 3, even within the same, from section to section, semester to semester, I won't teach it the same, because then the students will tell me which direction they want to go. But one general response is definitely there's a difference. When I do it in a philosophy course, I'm looking for the premises, I'm looking for the grounding of his thought, I'm looking to bring out the epistemology, the ontology, and to also explain what these ologies mean in the first place. When I'm doing it in a civilization studies program, it comes in a context of other texts. In general, we read Sophocles before it, Thucydides, or Herodotus, it was at one point, and then Aristotle comes after it. And so I treat it differently there, primarily because the students are not philosophy students, and there's no reason to expect philosophical knowledge from them, though we might want to share some of our knowledge if it is. But it's more of, to be very honest, but the word I use with my students, I'll use it, it's a trampoline. The text is a trampoline for further issues. We start from the text and go elsewhere, or start elsewhere and land on the text, hopefully. It's skills, it's analysis, it's critical thinking, but it's also empathy. It's also trying to understand what is he saying in the context that he is saying it. In the context of the course, I mean, not the historical, because Homer said something about divisions of the world, and here's someone saying about natural aptitudes and divisions of the world, and how does that connect, and how does that reflect? And then when I teach it in utopian thought, it's a totally different experience. Absolutely totally different experience. Because Plato wasn't writing a utopia, he couldn't have been, the word hadn't been invented. He was writing a text, Kallipolis, sure, the excellent city, but he had a different purpose. And so when we encounter it in that course, is different. With a different pedagogical purpose. I think that's true of any course. I mean, we teach literature courses in our CVSP. We teach also, courses in theological discussion. We teach courses in, Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations. And when I took it as a student of I think it was economics 211, it's of course very different from how I encountered it back then in the CVSP 203. Even as a student. Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm not really going to talk about the CS program because I'm not as familiar with it as most of you, so I'm kind of out of my depth like you had here. I'm also going to try to pick up on many of the themes that have come about. So my claims are generally pedagogical, and I was thinking, how can we frame what we're trying to get out of a liberal arts education in general, and how practically to pursue that? And I thought of 2 main, if you want, values that we can instill on our students. Both have to do with responsibility and ownership. One of them having to do with academic responsibility and ownership, and the other one more moral, better citizens of the world. And I was thinking, in terms of the academic responsibility and ownership, you can't. So you were saying we want them to be cultured. Really, in 3 years, you're not going to make them cultured. They're going to take a couple of courses, and a few years down the line, they're going to forget the content of these courses. But what you could do is you could get them to become the kinds of people who will go to a library, pick up a book, and read it. So it's not about what we teach them, it's about the skills that they'll end up getting out of it. So that's one thing. And another thing is, this is something that may be more specific to this culture, which is this general deference to authority people have, which is the professor says the words, they're sacred, I write them in my textbook, I spit them out in the exam, and woohoo, I've learned. And that's not supposed to be how it is, right? They're supposed to be critically engaged, and I found 3 magical words that I say in a classroom that really, really help. I don't know. right? And I'm not afraid to say it. And when I first started teaching, I thought, this is like the worst thing I can say in a classroom, but you know, I'm not supposed to be an expert in everything in the world. I'm a philosophy professor, so when I say to my students, I don't know, they actually look it up. And sometimes they tell me interesting research from physics or from psychology, and I tell them, that's really fascinating, can you send me those articles? And they really feel like, at this point, they're engaging in the discipline. They get a sense of responsibility, they get a sense of ownership. And sometimes they continue to email me these interesting articles from different fields of research well after I stopped teaching them. And I feel like I've done something there. Of course, I don't say I don't know it to all the questions all the time. Every now and then, and the student feels like they've achieved something. So that's for the pedagogical, academic responsibility that we should be instilling in them. The moral responsibility and ownership, that's kind of a trickier thing. I teach ethics, so you know, I have a clear interaction that kind of allows me to talk about that. But I think that each of us can be kind of doing that by acting like role models. And how do we do that? Well, that's easier said than done. The one practical step I've taken is to force every single student to come to my office at least once a semester. And once they start dealing with you, like you're just nice to them for 5 minutes, and that makes a world of difference for them. That makes a world of difference for them as they're dealing with you. They stop thinking of you as this unreachable person who's very far away and distant. They start thinking of you as someone they can communicate with, and they start wanting to be better citizens of the classroom and citizens of the university. They feel like, okay, I have a responsibility now. So between just instilling these kinds of feelings within them, the feeling of, in that case, I would say that's the feeling of empathy, the feeling of connecting, and the feeling of critically engaging with texts. And one thing I love telling my students at the beginning of the semester is, your job is to make my life hard, right? I want you to be as critical of what I'm saying as you possibly can, right? Because I'm not presenting what I think, and I don't take insult in any time you criticize my argument. I want you to do that. That's the best way you can be a student. So when you give them that context, I feel like there's a lot to be gotten from it. And I'm not as pessimistic as some of you. I think there's good stuff coming out of these kids.
I guess it's my turn to say a few words, and I'm going to come at it from my own disciplinary background, I think, because I think ultimately this is part of the question that Richard was, or part of the bomb that Richard laid out at first. But first, I'm wary about the drift that I have sensed this conversation going, that sees as the major threat to CS or liberal arts some sort of religious fanaticism. Actually, it seems to me that the fanaticism that does pose a real threat to CS and liberal arts is the fanaticism of the market and the neoliberal capitalist logic under which we have to live. And it's a complicated story and a serious one, but I think it affects us here in absolutely evident ways. Now, as far as the disciplinary dimension, I think disciplines are both necessary and insufficient. And they're necessary because they provide us with the parameters and the texts and the tradition within which we build our work, but they're insufficient, and my discipline, perhaps primus inter pares, is insufficient because they, by equal measure, they also limit the types of imagination that we can have. And the principle that has dominated my discipline, which I'm a historian, is the principle of reality. That everything, that the hold that we have upon knowledge is that we historians have a particular connection to reality. And the greatest offering, the greatest gift that CS has given me as a teacher and as a researcher and as a scholar, not only, and I think this is important, not only as a gift that we bestow upon students, but also the gift that keeps on giving to us as thinkers and as participants in this space, is that it disrupts this simple principle of reality, or the mechanism by which reality seems to speak to us in immediate terms, which is what my discipline grounds itself in. Actually, reality does not speak on its own. It speaks to us through texts. And the past does not appear to us in its raw form. It appears to us through textualized remains. And this is what CS has offered me, and this is what I cherish about teaching in CS every year. And it's a gift, as I said, that keeps on giving, and that I hope will continue to keep on giving. And what it teaches us is that our thought, truth, argument occurs within traditions, and reason occurs within traditions, not outside. And what CS teaches us is that the disciplinary traditions say, according to which I build my arguments, I build my thoughts, are not the only ones available, are not the end of the earth.
Can I say something, please? I think, CS programs in our universities in the Middle East or in Lebanon need to be revised every few years. We are living in a very changing society. Things are developing, and I think CS courses can address current issues that are interesting and important for our students. So, for example, if we make a kind of assessment of our students, a survey which would show what are the inclinations among our students. Like, for example, as Hani mentioned, now we can see that there is religious inclinations in our classes more than before, or at least it's more open than what was before. We can find texts which can, in fact, address these issues in a way that would be appealing to our students. Dr. Hazul mentioned Rumi as a universal figure. Has Rumi ever been included in the CS programs of AUB or LAU or NDU? Never. Whereas, in fact, in 2005, 2006, he was classified as the most read poet in the USA. But he has never visited our CS programs in any of our American universities in Lebanon. So probably a revision is needed by now for our CS programs in all these major universities. Because, as I mentioned, I took my 4 CS courses in the early 80s of the last century, and I wonder what is the percentage of change or development which has occurred in the program since the early 80s to meet, in fact, the new needs of society, especially the need of the young generation, in order to make it more appealing and to make them cultured in the sense that you mentioned. This is what I meant by being cultured, that they would love to go to the library and pick up a book. When they hear about a new book published in a field that they are interested in, they go and get it. And in fact, if they hear Rumi or the one that Jihad likes very much, Al-Mutanabbi, or Abu Ala al-Ma'arri, I know his poetic taste. So they will go and read it. If we can create this, sense, this attitude among our students, I think that would be a great accomplishment. But it cannot be created if there is a kind of stagnation in our programs. And there is slight stagnation, I think, in our programs.
En passant, I make a quick thing. We're always revising it. There's nothing stagnant. The problem is we're no longer, we don't have much to work with. And so we're really rubble trying to, but we're trying always to revise. We have, made some differences. But everything you say is, we are quite concerned for.
The idea of revision, I believe, cannot remain internal to the program. I mean, this is a program that is serving a wide constituency, impacting people from various disciplines and specializations. Any serious revision, in my opinion, has to engage practitioners from these various disciplines and specialties. Currently, I think physics may be represented through a token lecture in relationship to Hawking's book on history of time. I feel this is a serious lack, not just in terms of representation, in terms of numbers of hours dedicated to the history of physics or epistemological considerations in relationship to physics. No, I think there is more to it than that, in the sense that physicists need to be collaborating very closely with people who are teaching in CS, and design of programs that build on the interests, passions of their students. If a student is keen on going after the history of a certain field, then that student should be collaborating with a physics professor who is keen on similar issues with a professor of history, and actually building a curriculum that is fully dedicated to that student. In the sense, we are small enough, dealing with small enough numbers across the university, numbers of interested people I'm talking about, that the notion of designing programs to address the interests of that small number seems absurd to me. Tailoring curricula for interested students is a more promising way of at least identifying directions for new courses. The proper way, in my opinion, is a pragmatic way. You're looking for a new course, open it to an experiment. One student, two students, two faculty members, let them work it out. Let them find an interesting way that a student in mathematics can get deeply into logic from a philosophical point of view. I've certainly come across many students who've migrated from engineering to physics and then from physics to philosophy. In fact, we have a number of faculty members here at AUB in the humanities whose history at AUB started either in the math department or in engineering or in physics. The interest is there, the passion is there, but somehow we continuously try to find global solution to particular problems. This to me seems like an ill-posed problem.
Is this working? I don't.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Just want to make some general remarks because I think I saw a drift in the discussion that seems to expect of what we are calling the Civilization Studies program to do everything for everyone. I mean, the student doesn't only take these few courses, they take all these other courses with you, so you can do whatever you want to do, like in philosophy, in physics, in mathematics, and so on. There is one essential element, I think, in the program that no course does, and that is it's linking various topics, various fields, various disciplines over time to give the student a general overview that I emphasized this morning when I was part of the panel, that no other course does. So this is the one link that specifically distinguishes the Civilization Sequence program courses from all other courses at AUB, physics included. As far as the idea of jihad that you need to have these specially tailored courses, by the way, we do have them. They are called tutorials. Every one of you can create a tutorial, have the few students, but has to be willing to offer such tutorials. There are many modes of teaching we have, and much of what is being said about the general aims of teaching and educating various students in all sorts of things can be done across all of these courses. But please don't expect the Civilization Sequence program, which includes 4 or 5 courses or whatever, to do everything for you. I think they serve the purpose of basically tying everything together so that when a student leaves this university, one has a view of what has happened in the past 2,000 years, and with the idea that they can now add on to it, or hopefully can see it as a background with which to basically judge the present as well as possibly hope for the future. So please don't mix the two things. I mean, I think there is a track in these courses which is a bit different from the others, although it might overlap with material with all other courses.
Thank you. If I just might end with this, what I started with, the whole question of where we are, because that's the question. And really, I don't think Richard meant to be pessimistic, rather insofar as actually wanted to get everybody interested in doing something about it, because I don't think anybody wants to really see the whole program go. And I think there are some serious efforts now to do some of the things Shihad was asking for, some of the things that my friend here from LAU is saying they're ongoing, but don't expect it immediately. We have to get backing, we have to get funding, we have to get, with only 2 courses and very few faculty members, and we have to handle students in particular. When the course worked well, and in no way does one want to go back to anything, but when this program worked well, it had 4 courses, so you could do something. And we had teachers from we had Makdisi, we had from physics. It used to be a program that invited people to come from everywhere. We've reached where we have reached, and so you're not telling us anything new, and you tell us what your students are telling you because they tell us. But some courses are more popular than others. Some teachers are more able to deliver what they're supposed to deliver, so you cannot get really a good assessment just from listening to some people. Some are really still very, very interested in what they're taking. They find them, earth-shaking. Even when they take just one course, I'm surprised, because I am, as a teacher, I'm extremely frustrated when I have to teach something that there's no longer, you're getting students who are in no way really prepared to do it in any way, and you have to do everything. You have to teach them how to read, how to write, how to think, and with no background whatsoever. So I thank Dean Bitar, ex-Dean Bitar, former Dean Bitar, for reminding us of this. But please help us all, and I think we're very happy to have heard all the remarks. Our teachers are here. I hope you've been listening to all of this, and this is really where we are. We are trying to get this program back in shape, pump life back into it so that it can do a bit more of what in the past we actually used to do. So it's not like we're leading a pie in the sky by and by, nor are we wanting to go back to the nostalgia route, but everybody has to pitch in with this. Nadir himself has been thinking about courses that, for history, for a physics student to get the history of physics, the history of medicine, these are in the pipes for that. So anyway, thank you all. I think this is the end time, and Nadir, if you'd like to say something to end the whole thing. Thanks everybody who came, everybody who contributed. It was from my point of view, I loved having you all with us and listening to everything. With hope, not with anything negative that was said by any of us. I know, because I know Richard and the others. None of us are despairing whatsoever. We're just saying, come on, everybody at the university get involved with helping us, come back into the program, teach with us. We're quite happy and open to go back to the previous model where we only had 2 or 3 full-timers. And all the people who taught the course were coming from, that's my own personal opinion, that's where I'd like to see us go. So you have people from all of the programs, all of the departments coming back and really being there, not just listening to their students what they said about it, or not knowing really what our situation is. Thank you.
Peter. Jihad is worried about people not knowing the history of physicists or their lives and so on. Physics students in physics courses never learn this. And unless you cover it in something like the Civilization Studies program, they will never see it. They hardly learn the physics that they have to learn. So let's not kid ourselves that some other subjects are covering much of that. If physics students don't get into a civilization sequence type program that covers these materials, they will never know about whoever Jihad happens to be interested in today.
Those are on Faraday.
I just want to make sure that I'm not misunderstood as somebody who is pushing another nail in the impending coffin. No, I should be thought of as a silent and perseverant ally of this program. And you will find me thinking with you whenever you call upon me to do so.
I think Nadia would like to say something to final words of thank especially the people who came from abroad.
Well, yeah, actually, I want to thank you all for this remarkable day. I would say that you know, what we encountered today added to the perplexity and the complexity of the picture. But I'm not pessimistic. I think perhaps I'm seeing this as an opportunity that a rethinking of CS can become potentially, and having you here with us can become potentially a university-wide project. I believe that the current president at least has in his heart this idea of supporting the mandate of the university in terms of its liberal arts education, and that the guidance as to how this can be implemented in terms of details at the departmental level in our program in relationship to the various offerings that support liberal arts education in the university require all our input in terms of presenting it to the higher administration. They are our colleagues after all. They know about the difficulties that the institution faces. They have in their documentation the kind of problems that face the various humanities department and CS in particular. The issue that was raised, and I could just get it by way of inference, in a sense, from what perhaps Richard has put on the table, which I think started from the morning, and I wanted it to be raised also with the presence of Dr. Ali Haj, is that ultimately are we going to be swallowed by general education in terms of a mandate of the university? And I don't believe this is the case. Actually, we are going to be more likely partners in trying to rethink liberal arts education in the university in view of also a potential new division that might be entering into the overall curriculum that serves liberal arts, which is the ethics center perhaps. So rather than keep on being fragmented, pitted against each other, perhaps we need now more a university-wide vision that consolidates all our resources. We have centers that have the promise of also delivering things that could feed into the pedagogy and into the curriculum, like the Center for Arts and Humanities. As it stands now, it is more a forum for exchange of ideas. There's brainstorming that happens in terms of developing new courses that could allow for interdisciplinary work to feed into the curriculum within departments. So I think there are certain factors in the university that would allow us, hopefully, to work with the administration in terms of coalescing all these resources. Now, I must say, you know, the science aspect, this is, I find it very crucial. It's still vague, and you know, in terms of the discussions that I had with my colleagues, and at times, you know, I had it individually with colleagues outside of CS. And perhaps it is biased somehow by the fact that I taught for about 10 years in the natural sciences tripos at Cambridge, in history and philosophy of science. And the kind of remarks that the students, you know, in a sense, share with us or shared with you, I used to hear them in Cambridge in terms of science students feeling really, you know, great discomfort with having courses in history and philosophy of science imposed on them. But ultimately, what I see is that the value of what we are trying to do appears at later points in their life, in their work, in their cultivation. Not necessarily all of them, but some retain elements of it. And no matter what we are going to try to do in terms of countering the effects of the impact of social media and the impact of demagogues on our students, no matter what universities are striving to do, I don't think they're going to necessarily succeed in that. And just to give an example, we spent about 3 months with 20 students trying to move them towards thinking critically about issues, let's say, the issues that relate to religion. And I think a demagogue on YouTube can attract perhaps thousands in that same time frame and really enlist them within a particular way of looking at the world. So this we can't really counter. But within the space of academia, within the space of AUB, I think we are capable of overcoming some of the obstacles that we face. But not perhaps in the form of CS in its current structure, rather taking CS to become again a project for the university. Maybe it will have a different name. But that project has to revisit the role of GE, has to revisit the role of the Center for Arts and Humanities, has to be a partner in shaping this ethics initiative for the university. And I must say the humanities department should be our partners in this. There are representatives from them in this room, and we rely a lot on their intervention in terms of perhaps taking this whole initiative to becoming the project for AUB altogether. So I fully agree on what you stated regarding the potential partnerships. Thank you very much, all of you, for